Good morning, everybody. It's good to see y'all. Can you hear me? Let me see. Gerald, can you hear me? All right, good deal. Hey, I'd like to welcome everybody. It's good to see you, and we'll call to order the Transportation Policy Board. We've got people that will be on the internet today, streaming over. I want to welcome them too, and our first order of business is taking care of the minutes. I'll entertain a motion if you're ready. Got a motion, need a second? Second. Thank you, Mayor. All in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to our public comments. Is anyone here today that would love to make a comment? I'm opening it up to you to be on the floor. Also to people that's probably emailing in comments at GNRC.org. Anyone? Good. Seeing none, we'll close that down and come back down to our action items. If you see your paperwork, we don't have any action items. Is that still true, Sean? Right. Okay. We'll move on to our informational items. Overview of the TIP development process. I want you, Sean, if you're ready, to talk about our TIPs.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Today, we're going to start with a presentation discussing the overview of the upcoming TIP development process, which will run federal fiscal years 2023 through 2026. So just to start off, I wanted to give a brief reminder of kind of the role of the Mpo program. The Mpo program is a federally designated program, and it provides an opportunity for local officials and stakeholders to provide input into the process of how federal funds are used for planning and programming of transportation investments. And this is done through what we call as our 3C process, making sure that it's a continuing, comprehensive, and cooperative process that this is done. And so one of those core products, or I should say some of those core products that we develop on our cycles is one is our regional transportation plan, which really guides our investments over the next 25 years. Also our unified planning work program that plans a lot of our activities, planning, reports, studies over the 2-year horizon. And both of those have recently been updated with the adoption of our regional transportation plan in February of 2021, and then the adoption of our work program in August of 2021. And today we want to focus on the TIP, which is really implement those investments over the short term, over the 4-year horizon. And I think today's focus will be on the upcoming TIP development cycle, and I think it's probably the most important thing that we do because it is this key mechanism that implements projects and sees a lot of those projects in your communities come to fruition and actually get built and implemented in your community. So just a couple of key requirements of our transportation improvement program. It has to be consistent with our long-range plan, our regional transportation plan. It has to be fiscally constrained, so we can only program funding for projects which we have available over that 4-year horizon. It lists all projects that are utilizing federal funds within the region or projects that are regionally significant in the region. As I mentioned, it covers a 4-year horizon, and we update the transportation improvement program at least every 4 years. And I think one thing that makes the TIP both unique and important is that it does capture the transportation investments of various project proponents within the region, so local governments, transit agencies, the Tennessee Department of Transportation, all of those transportation investments that are occurring and utilizing federal funds are captured within the TIP. And so it's an accurate reflection of a lot of those investments that are happening across the region in the near term. And our current TIP was adopted in October 2019 and runs federal fiscal years 2020 through 2023. We're kicking off now the update process for our next TIP, which will run 2023, federal fiscal years 2023 through 2026. And right now, we're anticipating that adoption for fall of 2022. Right now, our current TIP captures about $1.5 billion in total investments within the region. So even though it is a short-range program, captures a significant share of investments within the region. And so as we look to update the next TIP, I think it's important to talk about some of the known issues that we are experiencing or have experienced with the current TIP. So a lot of funding that's been programmed or allocated to projects that are in the TIP, these are commonly referred to as our existing commitments, have not always been obligated within the window that they have been programmed. And so some of those challenges may be not advancing through the project development process as anticipated. But that creates issues when the funds are not obligated in a given year. They carry over into the next year, and then you've probably heard the word unobligated balances, where these funds, if they're not obligated, kind of build up and accumulate year over year. And so that's one of the issues that I think that we'll be tackling as part of this update cycle. I think most of you are aware that the project development process is not always quick, and this chart kind of illustrates or takes you through some of those steps in the development process, from NEPA to design, right-of-way, construction, and some of those anticipated time ranges or duration that it takes to get through each of those phases of work. And I think one thing that is we're unfortunately seeing is that projects that are currently in the TIP, I think, are either taking these time ranges that we have for each of those phases of work. These projects are typically taking at least the midpoint of that time range or towards the latter end. So projects that are maybe going through the NEPA process are taking a year to 2 years to get through that phase of work. And I think that given as the time builds up across those phases of work, it's not uncommon for a project between the time that it enters the TIP to the time that it gets constructed and completed for that process to take about 10 years. And so that's something that I think we would all like to speed up. And so as we look to this TIP development cycle, I think there's some opportunities to do that. Some of the common challenges that we have identified, and this is some of the work that we've been conducting through our project delivery task force that kicked off in September. Some of those common challenges would just be a lack of neighborhood buy-in or community buy-in, oftentimes resistance to designs that are proposed or right-of-way acquisition as part of a project, insufficient staff capacity, and this captures all levels of government from local to regional to state, insufficient funding, whether it be to cover an entire cost of the project or to be able to come up with a local match to match the federal dollars on the project. We've also seen a siloed approach to project development where there's just a lot of coordination that's required across departments or with external agencies as part of project review and approval. Conflicting design expectations. Oftentimes this could be where a project might be located in a community, but the asset owner might be Tdot, and there might be different design standards between what the locals have through their standards in comparison to what Tdot has through their design guidelines. And then lengthy project review and approvals, and this is just getting through each of those phases of work and the necessary steps and time that it takes in order to do that. Just to dive a little bit deeper into some of those issues that have been highlighted by some of our member jurisdictions related to the insufficient funding, the required matching funds not being available on a particular phase of work, but not enough funding identified to cover all costs of projects is also an issue where either if projects increase as they get to construction, or there may be funding that was assigned to a project or program to a project for the initial phases of work for NEPA and design, but funding hasn't been identified for construction yet. And so those remain issues that we see consistently. Also waiting on Tdot for contracts or approvals, and so this is getting back to that review and approval process. And then lastly, just waiting on the completion of a prior phase of work, and so getting through each of those phases of work, whether it be NEPA or right-of-way, before those subsequent phases can proceed. So I think this next slide, I think, speaks to some of those potential objectives and opportunities that we have with the update of the next TIP cycle. You know, given a lot of the work that we've started with the project delivery task force, I think we're optimistic that there are some opportunities as we kick into gear for this TIP update cycle. But I think some of those objectives that have been discussed at the task force so far are to identify TIP projects that are inactive or have fallen behind schedule, in order to assess kind of those programming needs as we kind of refresh the TIP for the next 4 years, and particularly related to some of those existing commitments of projects that are on the TIP. They have funding committed to them. And, you know, as we assess some of those existing commitments to really compile good information, accurate cost estimates, realistic schedules and timetables for projects, because that all are the key inputs in order to inform and for us to really program an accurate TIP that's going to allow us to support the timely obligation of funding. And so I think some of the opportunities as we kick off this cycle is to explore opportunities to resolve some of these known challenges that we've identified in the project development process, as well as to test out some new policies or strategies that we think will be helpful in addressing some of these unobligated balances or, you know, delays in the project development process. So some of the key steps in the development process will be compiling project funding requests, and as I mentioned, a lot of focus on the existing, but also new projects that have been identified and funded through the Regional Transportation Plan and will be moving in to be implemented through the TIP. Also, prioritizing, you know, based on the available funding, being able to prioritize those not only existing needs, but also new funding requests based on what we'll have available to allocate to projects. Going through the state and federal review process once we have a draft document, and then circulating that draft document as well for public review before ultimately adopting the TIP and submitting it to the feds for approval. And so today I'll focus on kind of those first two items, which are a lot of the main key inputs into developing a TIP document. And so some of the short-term actions that we'll be focused on is really taking a look at those existing commitments and determining current TIP status, as well as funding needs in the near term with some of those existing commitments. Then we'll look at you know, some of those going through a process of having a call for projects to provide an opportunity for some of those new funding opportunities from the RTP to have an opportunity to be implemented through the TIP, and then also looking at some of the financial projections of, you know, what are we going to have available to program projects. And so in kind of focusing on that first one of determining kind of the existing status and funding needs of TIP projects, one way that we're trying to make that process a little bit easier is through a TIP project tracker. And we've, I think some of you have seen this as we've presented it at previous meetings, but we've been working with the task force to identify even some more improvements and revisions in order to make this you know, as streamlined as possible. There's a lot of information about projects, but trying to identify those real key pieces of information that are important to informing our future programming. And so we'll be working with you and your staff to confirm and update, what are project priorities, what are the status of those projects, identifying what are those funding needs by the different phases of work, refreshing the anticipated schedule, particularly, when are projects going to be entering the construction cycle, and then identifying some of those known challenges that a project may be experiencing and maybe any reasons for that inactivity and not proceeding from one phase of work to the next. I think another great resource that we've had and we've shared with you in the past is our TIP interactive database, which is also available on our website at gnrc.org/TIP. And you can search by your community or for individual projects within this database, and you can pull up a lot of the information that we also have contained within the project tracker, but information about the amount programmed, when it's programmed within each fiscal year by phase of work. And so feel free to begin reviewing that as well to see, what projects you have within the TIP, and as we begin to refresh that information. I've talked a lot about this, of just the, kind of what we're looking for as part of this update cycle, and, there's expectations not only of project proponents and members in this process, but also of MPO staff. And so, as I mentioned, we'll be looking for, updated information, accurate project descriptions, updated costs, anticipated schedules for projects, and in the development of this process. And staff, through this process wants to make this a, fair project selection process. We're going to take a lot of those inputs that you give us, identify the available funding, and, prioritize a TIP for your consideration. But I think one thing that I think there's an opportunity with this TIP development cycle as well is we have a lot of TIP programming policies that we've used for a number of years, and I think enforcing some of those TIP policies entails even removing projects that are inactive or that are not using the funding that has been programmed to them in a timely basis. And so I think those have been articulated in the policies, but I think staff has been hesitant to actually enforce and remove some of those projects. But I think the upcoming development cycle is an opportunity to kind of revisit these policies and see if there's any opportunities to strengthen some of those or add any new policies. So here's a list of all of those programming policies. I think the ones that consistently come up over the years are number 8, 10, and 12. 8 relates more to local project sponsors being committed to projects and securing the local match that's necessary on the funds that are programmed to their projects. And so we try and secure that local match in that fiscal year that the project is going to be utilizing those funding. For number 10, dormant or inactive projects, we provide when we program projects, we provide a 1-year grace period. So, if you have funding program for your project in 2021, that fiscal year goes by, the funding hasn't been obligated. We have a 1-year grace period for the project to obligate the money in the subsequent fiscal year. But that's another one where we'd like to be, obligating that money when the funding is programmed as anticipated, so that we can be obligating all of the funds in the given fiscal years that we've identified. And then lastly, for cost increases and cost overruns, this just spells out that the local entities are responsible for any additional cost increases or additional funding needs beyond what is identified with the federal funds. And so oftentimes, if there are cost increases that come with construction towards the tail end, local entities may have to identify local funds to plug that gap for the project to be obligated for construction. So kind of moving on to the next step of it, of issuing a call for new funding opportunities for those RTP projects that are contained funded within the RTP cycle. I think this is another opportunity that, once we've have a good handle on some of those existing commitments, we'll hold a call for projects. And one resource similar to the TIP application that's going to be valuable for you to review for new project considerations is our 2045 RTP application that contains all of the funded projects in the RTP, as well as those projects that were not funded or are illustrative projects. But you can identify those projects in your community and whether they're identified in the short-term, mid-term, or long-term time horizon of the RTP being, 2025, 2035, or 2045. And then lastly, I'll just touch on some of the financial information. This is still preliminary, as we've just had a federal infrastructure bill that's passed, and so we're likely to see additional funding, I think, which will be nice, but some of that financial information will be more solidified in the coming months. But just to give a brief overview of how the funding trickles down from the federal level to the state to our MPO, funding from the Highway Trust Fund comes down to the federal level to states. A significant portion of it comes through formula-based programs. This is the SDBG, NHPP funding programs, CMAQ funding programs that you're familiar with. In addition, there's also some federal discretionary programs that are also up for competition at the federal level. Both of those funding, ultimately come to the tip, but the formula-based program comes to the state on an annual basis, and we'll talk a little bit about how much money that is. And then it's divvied up between funding that can be spent by Tdot anywhere across the state, and then funding that can be sub-allocated to urbanized areas across the state and programs through MPOs, ultimately within their transportation improvement programs. So the funding that comes from the Highway Trust Fund to the states through the federal, the formula-based program is approximately 800 to 900 million on a over the last 10 years, and that amount is also capped through an obligation authority of how much the state can obligate within a given fiscal year. And that number ranges more between the $750 to $800 million range. And just a quick preview, based on some of the information that's been circulated from the federal infrastructure bill, if we were to estimate, kind of looking out over that federal fiscal year 2022 through 2026, the state's going to have an additional $1 billion over the next 5 years. And that the annual amounts between the 800 and 900 million range actually increased to the $1.1 to $1.2 billion range. And so ultimately we'll figure out how much of that, trickles down and is sub-allocated to the urbanized areas to be programmed through MPOs. But it's good news that the state will have additional money for transportation investments across the state. So as I mentioned, there's funding that can be allocated anywhere, and then what we have are urbanized areas and urban clusters where funding has been sub-allocated from that funding that comes to the state, sub-allocated to specific geographies across the state. And so you'll see the metro areas, including Nashville, Chattanooga, Knoxville, Memphis, Clarksville, and the sub-allocation of funding that they get within our particular region, the GNRC footprint, you'll see the MPO boundary there and the sub-allocated funding that comes to the Nashville UZA, the Murfreesboro UZA, and then Tdot also sub-allocates a portion of funding through these urban clusters, which are indicated in orange for areas that are under 50,000. And what that translates to on an annual basis for the Nashville area MPO on the highway side is about $25 million annually, largely from a sub-allocation of SDBG funds as well as sub-allocation of Transportation Alternatives Program funding. And so this will be updated as we know more about the federal infrastructure bill, but just to give you a sense of kind of what our baseline has traditionally been over the years. So kind of going back to the TIP development process, as I mentioned, the key inputs will be compiling those funding requests, identifying the available funding that over the next 4-year horizon, and then as we've already started looking at this, particularly on the funding requests and the available funding side, we'll continue to work with your staff over the coming months to really work through some of these updates to projects and make sure that we've got good input as we develop the TIP program. So that's all I have, and happy to take any questions.
Okay. Any questions for Sean? No one? Hey, thank you, Sean. Then we'll move down to item B, the proposed amendments for the 2045 Regional Transportation Plan, which is in conjunction with the TIP amendment, Cycle A. Okay, Sean.
Thank you, Mayor Bogle. I'll start and just introduce this next item and then turn it over to Anna. But as I mentioned, we updated the Regional Transportation Plan in February of 2021 and committed federal funding over the next 25 years to projects and programs. And so the federal funds largely are spoken for through that Regional Transportation Program, but there are opportunities where we don't amend the RTP as often as we amend the Transportation Improvement Program, but when either new projects become available with funding sources, either state or local, that it becomes an opportunity to revisit the RTP to ensure that we have captured those projects into the Regional Transportation Plan, given their regional significance or their use of federal funds. And so we've had a couple of requests from communities, Metro Nashville and Mount Juliet, for a couple of projects to be requested to be added into the Regional Transportation Plan so that they could move forward and implement those projects through the Transportation Improvement Program. So I'll turn it over to Anna to walk you through some of those proposed amendments.
Bear with us while we pull our maps up here. All right, so the first proposed amendment that we have to our 2045 Regional Transportation Plan is a request from Metro Nashville. It is for an East Bank Spine project, also known as the North-South Arterial Boulevard. This project is development of a multimodal corridor using some existing road segments and some new from the Jefferson Street, Spring Street area in East Nashville over kind of running behind the Titan Stadium over to the I-65 and Korean Veterans Boulevard area. This, of course, is a project that's not currently in the RTP, this along with the other 3 RTP amendments that I'm going to go over with you you'll also see related proposed TIP amendments for each of these. So you can see the TIP number here on our summary page that corresponds to this requested RTP amendment. The overall estimated cost of this project is projected at this time to be $150 million. It involves state and local funding, $25 million of which has been committed by the state at this time in local interstate connector funds. So the request, of course, is to add this project to the RTP. Next up, we have 3 requests from the City of Mount Juliet. All 3 of these are projects that Mount Juliet intends to undertake with local funds at this time. These are all widening projects, so capacity adding projects necessitating the need to add these to our regional transportation plan. The first project is the widening of Pleasant Grove Road from Old Pleasant Grove Road to Central Pike. This is a widening from 2 to 4 lanes, a median divided roadway with multimodal features. It includes a possible realignment of the roadway in anticipation of the future interchange that's going to be constructed at Central Pike and I-40. The estimated overall cost of this project is $20 million. And again, this is all anticipated to be local funds at this time. Next is the widening of East Division Street in Mount Juliet. This is from North Mount Juliet Road to Golden Bear Gateway. Also a 2 to 4 lane widening project, a median divided roadway. It will also include safe roadway shoulders, traversable side slopes, and multimodal features. This is a $25 million total estimated project cost. This project is actually currently on our illustrative list in the long-range plan, so the request is to add it to the fiscally constrained list of projects.
And when you said that, does that mean that it's already in the RTP?
It was submitted for the RTP as an initial project request. It did not rank high enough to be included on the fiscally constrained list, so. The illustrative list is sort of a reference of all needs in the region, but technically to be a part of the true fiscally constrained part of the RTP, it's got to be moved to that other list.
Was foreseen ahead of time.
Yes.
When we were working on it.
That's correct.
Correct.
Yes.
But the first one was not.
Correct. Yes. And then finally, we have the Eastern Connector Phase 2 project in Mount Juliet. This is the widening of Golden Bear Gateway from 2 lanes to a 4-lane median divided roadway from Cedar Creek to north of Curd Road. And this is another project that will include multimodal features. It's estimated to be a $15 million project, and this is the same situation as the previous. This project was included on the illustrative list of projects, and the request is to add it to the fiscally constrained list of projects. That wraps up the proposed amendments to the RTP, and I'm happy to take any other questions that anybody might have.
Got a question over here on my left, Ms. Anna.
Anna, back to the first project, I will concur that that's a very large project to hop into the RTP. That one, and I understand that things come up when they do. I would appreciate that we go to the PCP meeting. This is just a discussion at this point, some additional discussion at the PCP level, at a very technical level on that project. One of the specific points that I was looking at that with the mayor was with the use of the local interstate connector funds. That's very different than what many of us are used to seeing with that, the whole funding for that program. That would be something that I would be very interested in learning how that came about and what the difference is, because it's very different understanding of what was work under on a normal basis. And also how that project specifically jumped above not being an illustrative project at all, being what essentially is becoming, I'm assuming, is a very initial short ride view period. So some of the things there, some more discussion on that would be very much appreciated. And I understand where things come up. We all understand that with all the economic development we're seeing now. But some additional discussion would be certainly appreciated.
Sure. Appreciate the comment, Jonathan, and anybody, project sponsor or Tdot, if anybody wants to chime in on, any of the items that Jonathan raised questions about, you're welcome to at this time.
Sure. We actually brought a brief, it's just a few slides, not many. If there's an interest, I know I don't want to interrupt what you're doing right now, but if we want to throw those up very quickly, that's why Lucy Kemp and I are here today, is to be sure to give a little more context to that. And I appreciate your comment about understanding how economic development is driving things and schedules and such, in ways that we're having to be quickly responsive to and so forth. And we just appreciate the partnership with Tdot and the ability to be responsive to this incredible opportunity that's before us. But with the wishes of the group, Michael and others, however you want us to proceed, we're glad to show those few slides and put the
I think it would be
context.
helpful, let's see if there are other questions, so you can
Sure.
put them all at once. But I do think it would be helpful to go ahead and share your slides if you have them today.
Perfect. Glad to. Thank you.
Mayor Vogel, this is Mary Esther Reed, and I'm sorry I'm not there in person, but I also have a couple of questions, if that's okay.
Okay, y'all ready for Mayor Reed to have her question? Ms. Annie, you ready?
You want to take her question while we
Hey,
pull up?
you wanna, what, we wanna watch slides first?
Let's go ahead and take all the questions first.
Okay.
Everybody knows what-
Mayor Reed, go ahead.
So, and I don't know if this will be directed to Anna or if it'll be directed to Faye, and she may be going to answer these in the slides. And I think that was Jonathan that was talking earlier, and I too, one, I'm really excited about the possibilities of this project. But I also had just a couple more questions about the spine project and anticipated timeline, the concept, that sort of thing. But also, are you all anticipating needing federal funds for the $150 million? And if so, how much in regards to federal funds do you think you're gonna need? And then I think some of us probably read the article about the $50 million and what your council is looking at, and do you think you're going to be able to secure the $25 million from Nashville and the council? And then I also had questions about the LIC funding as well. I thought the cap was usually $4 million. Is that not correct?
I will speak, I'm certainly not an expert on this. I will say, my understanding of the program, and for those listening at home, this is Jonathan Martin, I'm TDC representative. I'm just filling in for Mayor Moore today. I went back and I believe that program refers to, it's back in the 1960s section of the state law that refers to and allows Tdot to build connector roadways to the intersections. It's a very short section of state law. It's about one paragraph, maybe 4 or 5 lines, that doesn't really list any limitations specifically. Well, the program we've worked on, and I've worked in local government now for 16 years, we've always worked on the understanding of the limitation of that program is $4 million, and not any more. Anything over that, the locals are responsible for. So that's what brought up the question from our point of view on that specific issue. I don't know whether there's going to be a written limitation anywhere, but that's what the limitation has been in the law. Yeah.
And I guess that was my understanding as well. And so I don't know if that's a Tdot clarification, or if that's something Faye might be able to answer. And again, she may be planning on answering all this in their slides.
She's nodding her head up and down, Mayor Reed. Got her thumbs up, okay?
Okay.
All right,
Good,
to
good.
hear from you. That's the reason you're
You
chairman of the
too.
task force. Okay, any more questions for Anna? If not, we'll move ahead.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for the opportunity to give a little background. We know that this is certainly a very noteworthy request and a remarkable time in Metro Nashville and in Middle Tennessee. And what is happening on the East Bank in particular in Metro Nashville is a once-in-a-generation kind of opportunity and activity. And I know you're all aware of the Oracle announcement and so forth. That's really a large part of this. But I'm very pleased to be joined today by Lucy Kemp. Lucy's Planning Director for Metro Nashville.
A few folks can't hear you without the mic.
Oh.
You have a mic,
Do you want me to go?
that portable mic? Maybe if you speak into that.
Can you hear me better now?
Why don't we just give her a proper mic? There you go.
You know, I've never been told that I was too quiet. This is remarkable. I'm just gotta have a moment here. I'm the mom of 3 sons. I'm used to projecting. I've been projecting forever. That's the only way to tell people, stop, don't do that. All right. Well, thank you again. I'll start over. I'm Faye DeMassimo. I'm Senior Advisor for Transportation and Infrastructure to Mayor John Cooper. And I'm also currently the Interim Director of Tdot. I'm joined today by Lucy Kemp. Lucy's the Planning Director for Metro Nashville. And we are both delighted to be able to bring you this background on what as we said earlier, is a very noteworthy request for a remarkable time in both Metro Nashville and in Middle Tennessee. What is happening on the East Bank is something that is generational in its impact, and the economic opportunity that we have here that will no doubt be a part of a regional impact is so important. And so, again, we're glad to be able to give you some of this background. I'm going to turn it over to Lucy to sort of lead you through really quickly some of these planning slides that offer you some opportunity into the background. And then I'm going to run through, I was trying to take down questions as you all were calling them out on the funding in particular, and I'm going to run through those at the end when she's done. Lucy?
Well, thank you so much. I'm Lucy Kemp with Metro Nashville Planning Department. It's a real honor to be here with you today, and I thank the GNRC team also for the overview and for giving us the opportunity to talk about the East Bank project. So, as someone mentioned, if you've been over to Titan Stadium recently to a game, you probably noticed that the East Bank today is characterized by more than 100 acres of surface parking lot and asphalt right on the river. This is a part of the river that's right across the way from the explosion that occurred in Christmas of last year in the heart of downtown Nashville. So we began the East Bank project in earnest in April with 18 public meetings to date, multiple surveys, and it's been a wide-ranging community engagement process. We've heard 2 main comments from the public who have participated. The first is we want safe access to the East Bank and through many different modes of travel. And today you can't really accomplish that, and I'll show you a graphic in a moment that illustrates the need. The other thing we heard is a desire for more housing, more mixed-use development and the like. That's a little more consistent with what you see from stadium uses elsewhere in the country. It also may serve to address some of the community's need for housing and the like. But we understand, if you want to move forward one, thank you. But we understand if we are to provide that kind of service to the community, we do have to have a strong mobility network. This is an area that you know floods and has some environmental issues, and so the mobility network absolutely needs to both respond to our transportation goals, but also environmental resiliency goals. If we did nothing, these projects would develop one at a time. They're already intensely zoned. So if we did nothing, we would just be creating a disjointed network best we can, piecing it together. This graphic shows you today how deeply constrained and disjointed the East Bank is. Right in the middle, you see Titan Stadium, and those dotted lines are the road network today. So it's no wonder that folks have said it's really hard. If you're down at TSD over near the interstate and you want to get up to River North where Oracle's going to be located, I challenge any of us to figure out how to do it, right? You got these series of pathways, very disjointed. And then you've got the interstate to the north and the river to the south, as well as numerous Tdot assets through the bridges and the like. And so we are really grateful that Tdot, I think, has looked at this and acknowledges how important their role is in helping us solve some of these issues over here today. Okay, next one. So very early on in the engagement process, we presented a concept for a north-south connection, which we believe would help move people more safely around the area. Please don't look at the pink line and assume that that is the width of a road or that is its exact design. We simply wanted to acknowledge that there is no north-south route today. If you look on the left, that's north, that's the Oracle campus. And so that will help potentially orient you, and then, of course, you can see the Titan Stadium there. So we presented a north-south route very early on, and then since that time, we have been evaluating in detail the technical and engineering feasibility of accomplishing such a north-south route because the area is so deeply constrained today. Next. This particular portion of the study area is one of the most technically complex I've ever seen in my planning career. There are 2 Tdot bridges, 1 CSX rail line, an interstate to the east, and then the river to the west. And so this is the subject of the agreement before you. There are a number of much smaller parcels and properties that are rapidly turning over in ownership. And like so many of you, I was really surprised when I saw the census and saw how quickly so many counties in Middle Tennessee are growing and outpacing Davidson County, right? So we're experiencing a lot of this pressure as well. And so there are many small properties situated in the study area that are selling and that want to develop under existing entitlements. If that happens, we will not be able to deliver the safe mobility network that's needed. And that is why we have a sense of urgency here and why we have requested support from our council to help us be able to protect the right-of-way and do more detail as we continue to do more detailed planning. I will just say to the mayor's good question that Metro Council did approve the agreement last night on consent. It went through 3 committees, and so with a 40-member council, you often are going to get some debate. I know y'all are sympathetic on that point, but we feel really good about where we are in the conversation last night. So with that, thank you so much again for your time.
Yeah. A little bit more on the funding, as Lucy just mentioned, the agreement from Tdot was accepted by our council last night. Understanding and intention that the matching funds that are required for that are actually currently programmed into the CSP that is currently before our capital spending plan. It's currently before our council and will be considered for adoption on December the 7th. So we are anticipating that would move forward on that time frame. And as Lucy mentioned, the urgency of this matter is that area that's shown right up there. We have properties with entitlements. We have property owners that need us to give them some greater level of certainty than where we are now. And if we let the area develop, all we're going to do is cost the taxpayers more dollars and more disruption and more time. And so advanced acquisition is a little bit new for us. I don't think we do a lot of it. Perhaps some of your governments have done more of it, but we really haven't done very much. So this is a little bit of a new area for us, and we've been very fortunate, again, to work with Tdot and with their right-of-way group to help inform us. So what we're doing, this goes to the question of federal funds. We are not currently seeking any federal funds. This piece and the advanced acquisition that just helps us be able to be in control of our destiny and manage the rest of this process effectively. We believe, obviously, at some point that federal funds would be desirable. So everything we're doing it to retain the federal aid eligibility. So, for example, we're doing NEPA. We're doing the right-of-way acquisition process per Uniform Act. And so we're following all those steps that are needed, even though we're not requesting any federal funds at this time. As we get more details on the project, one of the things, for example, that we did with Steve Bland is Steve engaged the Region 4 Office of Federal Transit Administration because we anticipate, and you've probably read that about this would be a multimodal fine. And so we did a presentation, just an overview to go ahead and bring them in the loop with the thought being that Federal Transit Administration somewhere down the road is likely to be a partner. Again, so we're taking all the careful steps to make sure we preserve federal aid eligibility, and we're keeping our partners at the federal level in the loop as to what we're doing and so forth, so that if those opportunities arise, whether it's through the new infrastructure bill that I know we're all very excited about, or, you know, existing opportunities, that we have those available to us. But the urgency of this particular matter and moving forward under this, the LIC program in cooperation with Tdot is for the connectivity of this area and ensuring that we don't preclude that with what's really strong pending pressures on the path for the connector. And I think so that was with regard to what you may have read in the paper about funds and the grant and local funds and the Nashville match, and I know Tdot's taking the question about the local interstate connector. I said Preston said he was going to get that back to you. Were there other questions that I can answer?
I think one question that our staff has, just clarification on the $150 million price tag, is that for the full length of the project or just phase one build out? And if so, can you clarify phase one termini so we get that straight in the public notice?
It's a very high-level cost estimate. You all had asked us as a part of being able to put it into the RTP for a high-level cost estimate, and it's for this piece that's shown in pink, but would include, you know, again, we're at such a conceptual level that we did something, Michael, as you can well imagine, something that's on sort of a per-mile, very high-level basis, but assumes that there's going to be some bridge reconstruction, assumes that there's going to be there's certainly some CSX coordination that we tried to include in that on the infrastructure side. It incorporates, you know, how those connections will make it to each end. But yeah, this is just for that sort of piece shown in pink.
So from Spring Street all the way over to, looks like that's connecting with Davidson over there. So that's what you're asking to be added to the plan, and then for the.
And then I have no doubt we'll be back for as more of the process as the project develops and we get further into the project development process. There's no doubt we're going to be back for this body and talking to you about this project many times over the future as we bring back the detail as we know it for further RTP amendments and additional TIP amendments that may be required.
Any more questions? Go ahead.
Absolutely. And Preston may want to comment on that. We have had an ongoing and incredibly strong cooperation with Tdot on the interloop work. And we are all of the work that Tdot is doing with the interloop. In fact, they're doing with some of what we've conceptually developed here. They're doing the microsimulation modeling with regard to the interloop concept. Sure.
Well, and as Preston's beginning to answer, let me throw out there, Preston, because I think a couple of meetings ago, Mayor Moore had asked Matt Missouri to set up meetings so that the board members could get a little bit more information about the interloop study, and he had promised to go back to Tdot to set that up. So maybe you could address that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me try to address a couple of the questions. I don't have, the LIC program, unfortunately, is not with my bureau, so I don't have all the details for that, so I apologize for that. I do know that, as Faye and Lucy kind of described, the importance and significance of this issue here is this economic opportunity occurring in Oracle and the amount of planning and study occurring on these things studies. So I think that it's really the involvement of the department relative to the LIC is kind of linking it back to Oracle. There's an important aspect. It's a major driver here. And this opportunity to really tie, I think this is a great example of a land use transportation, when you can really get your planning process and your land use opportunities and right-of-way acquisition in place. I think it's very supportive of really everything that's been used in planning. All that being aside, the question that you asked about 22. So Nashville has been working on the bank study. We've been coordinating probably well over 6 months now. I think
at least that.
At least that, yeah. I think that most of you are aware we started a regional suggestion study, and from that analysis, there's about 5 transportation projects that don't specifically say inner loop, but they relate highly to the bridge crossings up on Civil Melbourne, bridge crossing that used to be the 265. There's also projects in Fessler and Trinity. So you can begin to see how many projects there are in and around the loop. And so the department undertook a microsimulation analysis. That's understand because when we begin to address any one of those projects, we're going to have a significant impact on the movement of traffic. And so once we had heard about Oracle and once we knew about the impact study, we started to coordinate very, very closely with the city on their efforts. They had Lucy kind of presented the public engagement component. So within our micro-analysis, we have baked in some of the development assumptions that they are considering. So I think from a regional perspective, I think we will see the benefit of that microsimulation analysis and then how that will influence the ultimate design and build of any one of those projects that I mentioned. So I hope that answers your question.
Any more questions?
One last comment.
Okay.
Specifically with the LIC fund, I know that can be answered today, but before the final vote is taken or recommendations made to the PCC and the final vote is taken to the body, I would request that some research be done and ask a request that something the LIC, not necessarily something, but a good faith offer be made to the use of this amount of LIC funds would not affect negatively the use by other local agencies of that program, because a lot of agencies have been on that program for a lot of our smaller connectivity projects. This would be like what, six or seven projects for the normal LIC at $4 million apiece.
I think our commitment was 25 million.
That's correct.
Projects.
So good comments and absolutely I agree.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mayor Callis.
Project, real quick, just for my clarification, since they're doing $60 million in all local funds, kind of explain to me the process, why they're not requesting any funds from anyone else, they're just building their own, expanding a road, widening lanes, just for my understanding.
Any project that's regionally significant, capacity adding, needs to be included in the RTP, so these would be considered that.
Regardless of any other funds, just want to build your own road.
Correct.
Who determines whether it's regionally significant?
Well, we can always assist with any questions related to that.
You done, Mayor? Okay. Mayor Reed, you got something else you want to ask?
I did, just a couple of things. I just want us as a board to be prepared. It sounds like that, first of all, let me say, I really think that this will be a positive for Nashville, and anytime that there's a positive for Nashville, we all benefit. When there's a positive for Smyrna, you all benefit. So I don't want anybody to think that I am not in favor of the project, because by no means is it that, but this is a significant project. And it sounds like probably that they're going to be coming back to us possibly for federal funding, which then means that we as a board have to look at what our priorities are, because there's only so much money that there is to go around. So are we willing to give up some of our projects that already have been looked at for federal funding so that this project can move forward? I'm curious to know, because it is such a large project and one we're just kind of hearing about, what happens if we decided, Faye, to defer this project? What happens for you all until we could get more information on it?
Thank you, Mayor Reed. She's getting the microphone so you can hear.
So two things, Mayor Reed. One, I don't contemplate that this requires you to give up, or anyone else here to give up any federal funds that are already coming to the state. I think what we were talking about was, especially under the new infrastructure bill, that there are incredible competitive opportunities there and that's where our focus would be on federal funds. So again, this is not taking anything, doesn't require anybody to give up anything. This is us developing a project and seeking federal funds, which, by the way, we've been really successful in doing over the last 2 years and bringing in more federal funds into Metro Nashville on a competitive basis. So I would not, I think the assertion that it requires anybody here to give up something is incorrect. The other piece, the second question, was if there is a deferral. Again, we can reiterate, and Luke can certainly reiterate this, the pending development pressures that are on us are incredible. And the particular parcels, these smaller parcels that are in question here that we need to engage in advanced acquisition on are very important. And we've been told by the GNRC staff, of course, that as we understand, the TIP amendment process can't move forward without the RTP process. And therefore, those things are wedded together for us in order for us to timely respond to private property owners who have development desires for their property and be able to preserve the opportunity for an ongoing conversation regarding this piece of proposed infrastructure. So we would ask for your consideration to please seek your approval and allow us to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Reed, anything else?
And Faye, I would just like to say, I've heard you and Preston both talk about the communication y'all have had about this project, and I can't imagine all that's gone into where y'all have gotten this where it is today. So I definitely commend you all for that and for landing Oracle, because it's going to be a game changer for all of us. But when we were going through the getting the RTP and getting it moving forward and getting our board voting on that and getting past that, one of the things we talked about was better communication among all of us. And in my questions to staff, they didn't have a lot of answers for me on this project. And I would just ask that you make sure and that Metro make sure that they're including staff when they're having discussions on these projects, and that we're not the last to hear, that staff's not the last to hear, so that we can work hand in hand with you all to move the projects forward. I think we're all in partnership with this, and I never want it to feel like it's us against them or the GNRC or Tdot. We're all in this together. So I would just ask that you all kind of keep us in the loop as with staff.
Mayor, you absolutely have our commitment that that will happen.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Reed. That's good remarks. That's good discussion. Anybody got any more questions? Mayor Page. Page Brown.
I had been fine, whatever. I think first off, congratulations on the Pike project. I think that's really exciting, and I appreciate it certainly. He got input on that because I think it helps me a lot. So for them coming from it, I'll also get it. But this transaction, what they have tell us about comment making, y'all were talking about the amendments to the plan, and it's some extent that made me think that when something goes to the tip, it's locally funded, that the physical constraints are not being changed locally funded.
I think that's a clarification, right, Adam?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I completely understand the question, so if you feel like you've wrapped your head around it, you're welcome to.
Yeah, so if you're pledging 100% local funding to a capacity improvement project, that's fiscally neutral, so we'll just account for that.
Okay, that's what I want to make sure, but if there was
when you're
something,
intending to federalize the project, seek future federal funds, you need to be very thoughtful about
okay,
capturing.
that's as it should be, but there was something that was said that made me think that something, it was something to the effect of something going to just constraints. Wait a second.
You refer to physically constrained. That was the, physically constrained.
I think we're probably where there.
It should be neutral, you said it is, that's good.
Yeah, because, you know, in consideration of all the federal and state revenues that are available to us, you know, a fully locally funded project, of course, wouldn't impact that. Yeah, we wouldn't exceed our expected revenue. Okay. Yeah. Apologies for the misunderstanding. Thank you, Michael.
I think that's something that I was talking to you was the fact that we have projects maybe that's under, but it's illustrative, it's not cost feasible. The city, from our making those improvements, didn't know that we had to notify you and put it in the TIF. That's one of the things, the first time I see this one. Is that what we requested from the city? You want to, if we want to embark on a project on our own, anyways, you still want that?
Yeah, we can unpack that definition. There's a federal requirement all regionally significant projects to be accounted for. It's not so much of an approval process in the same way that it is for the expenditure of federal funds, but they need to be accounted for. There's some discretion in how we define regionally significant within our region as long as it meets the minimum standards of federal regs. And so we can bring you that definition as we develop the update to the TIF, so there's good clarity about what that is. There are going to be times, though, where you're not asking for federal or state money, that you're still going to need some interaction with the federal or state government. And so being in the TIF is accounting for those future interactions, whether it's trying to tie into state route or federal interchange. So this is about transparency, about what everybody's doing to improve transportation across the region, which is why there's that accountability why there's that requirement to account for things. And then there's just always the opportunity there, if it is in the RTP and the TIF, and you decide to pursue federal funding in the future, you haven't hopefully, you haven't ruined your opportunity there.
Well, I'm glad, I was going to ask that question, so I'm going to answer that it's time, not asking for it. That would lead me to another question. So if I present a project with RTP, I say I'm paying 100% just me, and we get it off into the program. And I get off into it, and I start requesting. Does that put me ahead of other situations? Because I'm just, you know, me and Gary talk every once in a while, and his mind's turning right now. He's like, hey, I'm making this. That's fully funded road, and then I'm going to turn in request funding. How would that?
Well, like Michael mentioned, we would have to be really thoughtful about that. You know, sometimes in our evaluation process, like, for example, when we're updating the TIF, some projects get a scoring boost if they're already in the TIF. You know, we couldn't allow that type of scoring boost for a project that was in the TIF with only local funds, didn't already have state or federal funds committed to it. You know, we just have to be careful going forward about, you know, not giving an unfair advantage to those projects that enter the TIF fully locally funded.
And one of the differences here that I'll point out is that in the conversations with Mount Juliet, it was very clear to us, and I'm not going to speak for the city or say they won't change their mind in the future, but it was very clear to us that they had a path to locally fund those projects. And talking with Metro, it was very clear to us that they do anticipate going after federal funding. So there are differences there between the two projects, or the set of projects that are before you.
Okay. Mayor Brown.
I'm arguing in my own head about this at the moment, but I won't ask the question anyway. It seems to me that if something is fully funded and shouldn't be fully funded, it should either not be for, I mean, I know this doesn't apply to Metro projects, but we know the city federal funding, so it's important. But like some of the projects that are fully locally funded, why would you score and prioritize them? Looks like you would if they transition to the state federal funding, but why do it when they're fully locally funded?
The thought,
I think the practical nature of it, you're submitting, typically what you're doing is you're submitting your project ideas, when we do the call for projects. You don't really know at that time what's going to get the federal funding at the end of the process. And so we score everything, because if you do ask for federal funding or you do apply for competitive grants, we have a basis for supporting your application, or we have a basis for supporting a recommendation to fund, because we know where it stands against other projects. And so I think when you go into the cycle to update a plan or a TIF, you want to evaluate the effectiveness of any transportation improvement that's being made across the region, regardless of who's paying for it. If it is a regionally significant project, which is a requirement of federal regs, again, we can unpack that definition for everybody as we do the step update.
I understand it, and I don't want to take more time, but I do think at some point it would be helpful to have another primer on, prioritization process that staff goes through, so that we all have a greater level of comfort, so like we can, intervene, not intervene, but take away.
Okay, anyone else?
This is observation, Mayor. I just explained why it takes 10 years to get a road.
Well, that's. Is that a question? Okay, gang, let's move it right along. Anybody else got a question? Yeah. Well, I'm just glad I didn't have to answer. You know, throw me a softball. All right, Anna, we'll move on to item C. If you're ready. This is where she's going to propose amendments to 220 to 223 Transportation Improvement Program.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. This is our first cycle of amendments we have proposed for the new fiscal year 2022. These are projected to be adopted in December if this body approves. And I'll ask that you guys bear with me because we do have a list of 21 proposed amendments here. I'll try to crank through them fairly quickly, but please note any questions that you have about any of those, and I'll be happy, of course, to take those at the end. Our first request is from Tdot. They're requesting to add the Nolensville Pike widening from north of Mill Creek to near Old Hickory Boulevard to the tip with NHPP funds for construction. Following is another request from Tdot to add funds to the existing I-65 widening from near State Route 25 to near State Route 109. They're adding additional funds for NEPA and construction, both NHPC funds. We have another request from Tdot to add the Columbia Pike widening from Duplex Road to near Tollgate Boulevard. Adding this project to the tip with the NEPA phase program, also NHPC funds. We have a request from Tdot to add the Columbia Pike widening. Well, I should backtrack just a little bit. So the project that I just mentioned prior to this is the full scope of this Columbia Pike widening project from Duplex Road all the way up to Tollgate Boulevard. These next two are broken down into smaller segments of that overall project where they've split up the design phase into two separate tip pages. So I just didn't want that to throw anyone for a loop. But going back to amendment number 2022-004, which is the segment from Duplex Road to Thompson's Ridge Road and Buckner Road, adding the design phase to the tip with NHPP funds. And then following is Columbia Pike widening from north of Thompson's Ridge Road and Buckner Road to north of Tollgate Boulevard. That's that more northern segment of the overall project, asking to add the design phase to the tip with NHPP funds. Following that, another request from Tdot to add the I-65 widening from near State Route 41 to near Bethel Road to the tip, also NHPP funds for design. Next up, we have a request from Ridgetop to add state top funds to their Watauga Elementary School Safe Routes to School project. Then we have, this begins the projects that we are amending into the TIP that were a result of the awards that GNRC made for our coronavirus relief funding that we received allocated to our region. So these next few projects are all related to that award cycle. First, we have the addition of the North Nashville Pedestrian Improvements Project for WEGO, adding the project to the TIP with both local and relief funds. We have the Mount Juliet Road ADA Upgrades Phase 2 project, of course, from Mount Juliet, adding this project to the TIP with relief funds. ADA and pedestrian signal improvements at various intersections. This is in Lebanon, adding the project to the TIP with relief funds. And then ADA compliance upgrades at various locations in Smyrna, adding this project to the TIP with both relief funds and local funds. Then we have advanced transportation controllers in Franklin, adding this project to the TIP with relief funds. Raymond Hirsch Parkway, US 31 West pedestrian safety improvements in White House, adding the project to the TIP with relief funds and local funds. A streetlight LED conversion project in Hendersonville being added to the TIP with relief funds. ADA transition plan implementation in Sumner County being added to the TIP with relief funds and local funds. And then for Metro Nashville, pedestrian improvements at various locations being added to the TIP with relief funds. Next, we have a request from Mount Juliet for their East Division Street widening. We, of course, looked at this together when we were going over the RTP amendment. The request to add the project to the TIP with local funds for design and right-of-way. Mount Juliet's Eastern Connector Phase 2 project that we also reviewed as a proposed RTP amendment, adding the project to the TIP with local funds for design and right-of-way. Then we have a request from GNRC to add the Regional Transportation Data Acquisition Project. I know this was something that we discussed with both the TCC and this body as something that we were hoping to do as part of the call for projects for relief funds. This is for the acquisition of big data tools that we can share as a region to improve our transportation planning and system performance monitoring. Following that, we have Metro's request for the East Bank Spine, North-South Arterial Boulevard project. This is the request to add the project to the TIP with the state LIC funds that have been committed, as well as the local match for that funding. And then finally, we have the Mount Juliet Pleasant Grove Road widening project, also attached to those RTP amendments, request to add the project to the TIP with local funds for design. Thank you guys all for bearing with me through those proposed amendments. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, any questions for Anna from the committee? Seeing none, thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Good job. Okay, we'll move to our regular reports. I'm going to introduce Sabrina David for the federal reports. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, everyone. Sabrina David, I'm the Federal Highway Deputy Division Administrator. It's glad to see you in person today. Y'all have been talking about the infrastructure bill. Well, it's here. The president signed it on Monday, so it's excellent news. And so I wanted to tell you all first from Federal Highway that you're going to be hearing directly from us, to the MPO and to the cities and the counties. This authorization or this law is called bill. So there's been the IIJA, there's been and so it's the bipartisan infrastructure law. So you're going to hear it referred to bill. And so you're going to hear directly from us. I know Mpo and NECO and NACE and ASHTO and all these associations are sharing information, about national and statewide. But you're all going to hear it from us. Got signed on Monday, and so funding and what's available. Want you to hear from us first, and as soon as it's available, we are gonna get it out and work with, you know, Mpo and Tdot to get these presentations. Because there's so many different programs, we need to kind of break it down and show you, you know, depending on what kinds of projects you're looking at, and then, okay, what kind of funding might be available. And so it's really transformational, and so we're happy to hear your this week, and we look forward to seeing you on this.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Anybody got any questions? Okay.
Are you gonna have a central final rule? Final rule?
Let me just say, there's so much to come out. There will be rulemaking on certain provisions of the law that as much as we get out of guidance, we will get out to. But there's so many, there needs to be, we have we call a legislative implementation plan. But because there's so many new concepts and programs, we're prioritizing, and as they come out, we will get them out to you. And this is a five-year law, but there's new funding, and so if you're referring to like the first year, you have to spend it with, you know, obligated within 3 years. I mean, we're going to get all that information out to you because again, there's new eligibilities, there's new entities that previously they've not been able to apply for certain funding, so we want to get that out. As soon as it gets out, we're going to talk to you all. Again, not just at we have the NPO level, but down to the local level, because there's new discretionary grants that, you know, you're familiar with, you know, we have raised, and there's new programs that I know you all would be interested in.
Anyone else? That's a very good question, Mayor Teacher. Very good. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We'll do our Tdot report. I'll turn it over to Preston Elliott.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. The last time, I think, information that you may not have had, but probably read online. Unfortunately, Commissioner Bright has moved on to becoming the executive director of Megasite for Blue Oval. And 2 weeks ago, the interim commissioner, Joe Galbata, who's the chief financial officer of the department, named as the interim commissioner of Tdot. He's been with us for about 10 years. Some of you probably worked with him or seen him across the state at various outings since he's been here for quite some time. So I just want to let you know that. And then I kind of feel a little bit like Santa Claus, because in the next month or so here, we're going to be announcing awards, our Improved Transit Capital Grant Program. That provides funding to transit agencies for transit capital improvements. Our CMAC program, congestion mitigation and quality, and then the multimodal access grant program. So in the coming months, you should see some awards on all three of those programs. So pretty exciting opportunities they're going to be for funding improvements. And then lastly, we started last year with our Urban Transportation Planning Grant. It's a $200,000. Okay, thanks. I didn't see that up there. Sean, appreciate that. And here are the eligibility components to the program, but has the ability to provide up to $200,000 with a 10% match. And I think we're currently working on the Sumner County bicycle Pedestrian. So I think last year we had about 8 projects in your region that submitted, so a lot of interest. This is, again, it's a new program, and we're glad to be able to offer it to the community. That's all I have.
Okay, any questions for Preston? Seeing none, I'll move to the chair's report. I don't have anything to report, but I was going to let Mayor read. Mayor Reed, you still on? Sound like she's done checked out. I tell you, we'll turn this over to Sean. He's going to report about the task force. I got to go to the first meeting at Smyrna, and a nice location, a great meal. And then I didn't get to go to the second one where Mayor Callis hosted the committee. But Sean, you want to report on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I talked a little bit about the task force and how we're working in conjunction with the task force to inform some of the updates for the TIP cycle. As mentioned, we've held 2 meetings so far, one at the end of September one in the middle of October, and had an opportunity to get a lot of the foundational material background information on TIP and programming policies, and really trying to kind of move forward into kind of the background information to discussion of specific projects and how we can better compile the information and share that information with you to ensure that everyone's on the same page and working off under common information about costs, schedules, timelines, and things like that. And so we have an upcoming meeting. We are penciled in for Franklin for our third meeting. We'll be sending around an announcement of this, but looking at Tuesday, December 7th. And at this one, we'll start to get into more of the project details and focus on some of the past obligation information on specific projects. And so have an opportunity to really dissect that project tracker and get some input from the task force on information that's helpful, information that we might need to replace with other information, and then share that information as well with the TCC and Transportation Policy Board in the month of December. And then also, those of you who are familiar with, we do required to publish an annual listing of obligations by the end of the fiscal year, or by the end of the calendar year, to reflect the last fiscal year of obligation on projects. And so we'll be previewing some of that information to then share with both the Transportation Coordinating Committee and the Transportation Policy Board at the December meetings as well. And so looking forward to that. And then I think, I can just move into
staff report.
Staff report. I guess two things to share. One, Carson Cooper on GNRC staff has done a lot of great work with taking the 2020 census information and kind of identifying some of those highlights within our region. And so we'll be sharing some of that information with you all. She presented to our Transportation Coordinating Committee earlier in the month, but we'll give you a package up some of those highlights to share if you're interested. And then also to just kind of talk a little bit more about the infrastructure bill. I know that we're waiting on more of the details, but as we've been combing through all of the different reports and summaries of the different associations across the country, I think a couple of initial high-level components stand out. So the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, as mentioned by Sabrina, was signed on Monday, provides $1.2 trillion over the next 5 years. And I think what's significant is that almost half of that, $550 billion, is new federal investments on top of what we've traditionally had. Promotes investments in safety, equity, resiliency. I'm sure I'm missing some key topics, but you'll see in some of the new programs, discretionary and formula, that these tend to be highlighted. Adds new formula-based programs, and then also increases funding for some of the existing discretionary programs, and creates some new discretionary grant programs as well. And so I'll just highlight a couple of those. Don't have much details on a lot of these, as that is to come, but just some of the new formula-based programs, bridge program, EV charging infrastructure program. In terms of increases to some of those existing discretionary programs that you know about, the RAISE grant program and infra, RAISE increasing from $1 billion to $7.5, and then the infra from $1 billion to $3.2 billion. And so some sizable increases for these discretionary programs. And then just some of the sampling of some of the new discretionary grant programs, kind of ranging across a couple of different topics. Safety, I think, being a key emphasis. You'll see, Safe Streets, Healthy Streets program, EV charging, as I mentioned, active transportation, and then also for bridge and culvert, rehabilitation, replacement, investments for kind of maintaining the existing system. So more to come on that, and we'll continue to, circulate what we get from Federal Highway and Tdot and others, and how it kind of makes its way down to us. I think one thing that staff is just thinking about is how we can kind of identify opportunities to help position the region and projects within our region to take advantage of a lot of these new discretionary grant programs. And so we'll be keeping an eye out for that. And that's all I have for the staff report.
Okay. Hey, thank you, Sean. Any questions for Sean? Hey, thank you and what you do, and Anna and Michael and them, what all you do. And tell your staff we said we appreciate all the work they do. Is there any other business to come before the committee?
Mr. Chair, I just want to make an announcement that given the lengthy nature of today's meeting, we're going to go ahead and postpone the GNRC workshop that was to follow because we know there's a Mid-Cumberland HRA meeting today. So we'll make that information available online and try to set the time where we can continue our conversation about that. Staff will stick around, though, in the hallways if you have any specific questions about ART and how we might be able to help. I do apologize for that. Before I turn it back over to you, Mr. Chair, I do want to give a shout out to May Wright, who is social equity representative from Trousdale County, who is going to be attending her first GNRC meeting today. So thank you for coming to Nashville and being with us today, and we'll follow up with you shortly. So I just wanted to make that announcement before we break.
Okay. Any other business? Before I ask for adjournment, I just want to say that when I got elected, I didn't know that we had to do an ADA analysis. That hit me right in the face right from the start. But I did call GNRC, and I'm going to tell you, these guys come right on board, and they're going to finish up in December for me. And, you know, we pay dues. You take advantage of it. You got something you don't know or question or maybe need some help on something, I'm going to pick up the phone and call these guys. And, man, they've been a lifesaver for me on that program. All right. I'll entertain a motion, and I'm going to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. I got a motion. We are adjourned.